So there was this weird thing that happened when I started to do spiritual research. So it wasn't just this, it was, paganism, Wicca, even like the Greek gods, Norse gods. There were these elements that were weirdly consistent. And I recognize them because they often play a role in abuse dynamics. And so I thought I would just talk about that for a second. So, one of the things that you see is a spirit, an entity, a god needing your permission to like rule over you and have authority over you. And there are different ways that in individual religious contexts you might give that permission. But sometimes people get tricked into giving that permission, or they will be like lawyered into giving that permission. So the the context of the devil specifically like is very legal, weirdly, and using legal laws to get at people. So a good example of that in like a folklore sense would be from the song. It's like an American Southern song. The devil went down to Georgia, and it's the devil and this, famous fiddle player. Um, and the devil says, I want to compete with you, and if I win, I get your soul. And, if you win, you can have my golden fiddle. And so they have their fiddle off, and in the song, the guy wins. But, like the devil's supposed to be the ultimate big bad. Like, what's with the rules? What's with the, like these kind of very legalistic agreements? Or in, sort of more Arabian folklore, the concept of a jinn or a genie, an entity that's got power, but like needs your permission to use it. And so you ask for a request, and the genie gives you what you want, except not in the way that you want it. But it fulfills the legal parameters of what you ask for. And so people think, oh, you know what I'll do? I'll write the most, you know, legal bulletproof request I can make. And then that way I'll get what I want from this genie and its power, but like I'm not going to get harmed in the process. And usually this moral of that story is that you really can't do that. Um, or you've got, there are trickster gods like Loki. Native American traditions have trickster gods. But it's all this sort of process of getting a person to come to this entity and to somehow be put under its power and authority. And I had this moment where I was like, oh my God, abusers do this too. So much of abuse is coercion or force to get you to agree to what they want you to agree to. And then once you do, they take that power and authority over you, or they'll put themselves above you in a hierarchy. So, for example, you've seen videos coming out of the Middle East where they're trying to get a young woman who doesn't want to get married, or at least to this specific person, to sign a marriage contract. And the one video I saw was this woman, like older lady, like putting her hand on her hand, forcing her to sign this contract, which is so bizarre. Like, oh, why don't you just use your power at them? But then, I'm flashing back to, we have stories from, for example, the Middle Ages, where maybe a young daughter doesn't want to marry whomever her father has picked out for her, and she basically gets, forced to the altar, coerced into a position where she feels like she has to say yes, otherwise bad things will happen. Why? Why do they need the agreement so much? It's so strange. And so there are things that people do to get you to come under them in a hierarchy, to agree to be under them in a hierarchy, for them to have power over you. And then they just use the power however they want, and they're misusing that power. So, for example, you know, an experience I had recently was with someone that I have been helping over the last several years. And this person, there were things that I told them about, like things I'd done in my past that weren't my best option. So something, stuff like when I was 19, just sort of to build trust that, they weren't thinking that I was this person who thought I was so perfect coming in, telling them what to do. Like, no, listen, I've made my own mistakes. We all do it. We learn, we grow, right? So it's okay to have made mistakes. We're moving forward. But the weird thing was, she kept bringing this stuff up, like often, every time. And it was like, this is so bizarre because usually when you see this, it's in a relationship dynamic. And so the person bringing up the issues is the person who is directly affected by the issues. They're still holding resentment or pain or harm from it, maybe. Or maybe they're just, using that as an excuse to, try to make you feel bad, to shame you. But in a relationship, you sort of go, well, yeah, I did the thing. And so, it kind of makes sense, but it's very strange because this had nothing to do with her and isn't even decades relevant. Like, why would this person bring this up so often? And it dawned on me. She didn't like being helped, but she needed to bring me down to her level. She was trying to shame me into a place so that I wouldn't think I was better than her, which is like the whole point of me sharing that in the first place, was to make it clear like that is not the dynamic here. And so I realized, I had that like flashbang moment to the points in my past where I'd had that happen. And I've heard it from other victims of abuse, where an abuser will take a mistake you made, or maybe an apology that you made that you actually didn't think you did anything wrong, but for the purposes of, oh, I want to kind of like repair the situation, I'll go ahead and apologize and that'll make everything better. And it doesn't, but they suddenly feel like they have a golden ticket to bring up any time. They want you to feel shame and therefore you to put yourself underneath them, like in this hierarchy. Now, in healthy relationship dynamics, it's not a hierarchy, it's collaborative. I know, like in a good relationship, someone might have like their area of expertise, so the other person might defer to them on that. So if someone's like good at cars, they kind of take the lead on cars, and if somebody else is good on cooking, they'll take the lead on cooking. But in general, very collaborative. It's like an equal partnership, like a true partnership. Whereas when you're dealing with people that are hierarchical, they need to be up. They need you to be down. And so there's this concept in Christianity called demons. That's what they do. They trick you into doing a bad thing, and then they use that against you to make you feel shame and bad and like you don't deserve, let's say, goodness or whatever. And I'm like, abusers do that. Now, I'm not making any claims on anything. It very possibly could be that religious people, noticed a pattern and applied it in a spiritual way. But I wanted to bring this up in a video because many people today are atheists, or if they're spiritual or religious, maybe haven't done a lot of research into it. And so aren't necessarily making these connections to behaviors that are occurring with like actual abusers in their life. They're trying to get permission from you to hurt you. They're trying to get you to do something wrong so that they feel entitled, empowered, justified to punish you for it. Right? And when you're the victim, you're like, but no, this isn't fair. This isn't what happened. But they'll take your technical apology as evidence that you were the one who did the bad thing or the wrong thing. And therefore you should be shamed and that they get to punish you. Stay away from these people. Stay away from anyone who is bringing stuff up like this from the past. They might even think they like you, but it's definitely a sign of resentment. And it could be a sign that somebody doesn't actually like you. But this person is trying to prosecute you with your own, let's say, failings, and there's no concept of like, we learn, we grow. It's you did this thing, and now forever and ever, I get to use it against you. Whereas like in a healthy dynamic, first of all, the failing isn't that big a deal, but you get to learn from it, move on, and grow. In an abuse dynamic, this gets tricky because an abuser is legitimately doing extreme harm to the other person. And so a victim is perfectly within, their rights to say, you did this thing and it's not okay. But the difference is you will never get power over them for it because they're never going to accept shame for it. They're shame avoidant. They're always going to flip it on you. That's why the DARVO. That's why they deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender, because they're operating in this weirdly legal sense. Like, I don't know any other way to describe it, except I absolutely see it's occurring. Anyway, I welcome your thoughts because this is something that I'm still kind of working on. So, any ideas, comments, opinions that you have, like, feel free, because we're still workshopping this. But I definitely know it's something that is occurring in the majority of abuse dynamics that I've seen. Anyway, I hope this makes sense, and I'll talk to you next time.